Be strong.
Man, Phil, you ain't know what the fuck you talking about, bro. You ain't no blue mage. Hey, like I ain't spent senses divine and top. Like I ain't tried to set up a miracle 7-mana time walk. Tapping and casting the kind of magic that's slapping all of the magic you're stacking. That's lacking the backing of cabin back of flashing them back. You're saddened by my lack of compassion while you're slacking. I'm snacking like I ain't the best to play this game. Forcing negation targets your past in flames. Like I ain't been to infinite convention centers where the magic Twitter hashtag conveniently ain't the same. Like I ain't frightening, never through lightning. Like I ain't lost money trying to buy out Breitling. Like I ain't a fixture, thinking big picture. Shuffle back my graveyard, drinking elixir. You know I'm sculpting your mind, we'll go into time easy. Raveling time, the stack is all mine.
Sleazy.
Parting the veil, forcing dispel. Always shuffling ponders and asked if you would like to reveal.
Seriously?
Like I never got choked, never got cataclysm to crater hoofed. Like I never ever stared at a devil or a chalice to shepherd and planned out every way that I could kill myself. So pray tell, what if what's never happened? How much more time in life would I spend being happy? Would it be a travesty to never see the epiphany of seeing a miracle against so drowsy getting splattered? Like I ain't smart, like I ain't hard, like I ain't sweeping the border drawing 3 cards. Like I ain't chic, like I ain't slick, like I ain't properly stacking these predicts. Like I ain't maul, like I ain't keep, like my sorceries ain't at instant speed. Like I ain't smooth, like I ain't cool, like I ain't entreat the angels. What it do, what it.
Try to come at me, tell me I ain't no blue. I'm terminus the shit out your board, bro. Terminus the shit out your board.
Hello and welcome to Eternal Dirtles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me as always, Phil Bleckman. Phil, how's it going, man?
Yo, what up, dude? Good to be back. How you doing?
Doing all right. I'm excited to I'm gonna go hang out with some friends this weekend, and we're running like a beach house, and we're gonna play some EDH.
Hell yeah, dude. You know, it's one of those things where I would love to, if I were to build an CDH deck, I would build Gwafa Hazid. Only because I don't really have much interest in playing EDH, except for the times that I've very much enjoyed when players are trying to do everything they can to win, like they're not sidestepping to let people do fun stuff, because then it feels like.
Yeah. Well, that's CEDH. That's competitive EDH. There's a whole format for you, Phil. Oh no, Phil's gone dark. Everybody,
I haven't gone dark. I'm fixing my sound issues over here. So I have sound issues going on, which should not happen with somebody who does a lot of audio for. All right.
Well, while we're talking about that, let's real fast. This is not going to be a episode about EDH, but I should let you guys know like some of the ideas behind like what the CDH decks that I have are like. There's Karacas, the like son of Yawgmoth.
Dude, I love that there is no established accepted way to pronounce his name.
There's none. And that's basically just like
Karacas.
You play what's it called? You play a bunch of stuff, and basically it's like a funny storm deck that like you try and get to 4 mana as fast as possible, and then like you recast Leshrax's Right over and over again because it's an enchantment that you can bounce back to your hand for 2 black. So it costs you 8 life to like bounce it back and forth into your hand, but when you get to Aetherflux Reservoir, you get to a point where I think it's like 34 life. If you have 34 life, you can like win the game right from there.
And also, when you are storming out like that, you just make a really fat life linker.
Yeah, well, the thing is like if he lasts for a turn in CEDH, like he's probably not going to get to attack. Someone's going to get rid of him. So you have to basically like. Because you're playing like Thoughtseize, Duress, stuff like that to like try and hit the spells that like your opponent would play to kill him. But chances are like who if you pass the turn after that thing goes off, everybody at the table, there are 3 players that are like, we got to kill that guy before the game's over. So you're unlikely to be able to attack with him.
You just put the target straight on your head, yeah.
Then the other one that I have is like there's a lot of fun things to do with Marcel. Which I don't know if you know what Marcel is, but the idea is
Pretender,
that's a super fun card to play in EDH period because you can do things like almost every card that goes in that deck is literal draft trash from like the last 27 years of Magic the Gathering. Like you can get like Minion of Leshrac that's like it has all these things that have like ridiculous upkeeps and are just like unplayable garbage, are awesome on that card because it's just 4 mana. Now you have a minion of Leshrac that doesn't have an upkeep cost, or like just all these cool like abilities that you can just like spam onto them. You can get to a point where you got like Aetherling and you can blink him out. He comes back in and gets a new one. And they're all the so what he does is anytime you put him into play, you exile a artifact or creature from your graveyard or your hand, and he gains the abilities of that card, the activated abilities, and they can use it. He can use them once per turn. So like you can blink out Aetherling on each person's turn and basically keep gaining all these different things. And if you have something like Anger in your graveyard with like a mountain in play, you could like play Arcanist the Omnipotent and like draw 3 cards like every turn and blink them out for like 1 blue. There's a lot of fun things you can do with that deck, but like the way that it wins is normally like you play Aetherling and like Nevin Rao's Disc, and you just blow up the board constantly until like you want to attack somebody.
Yeah, for anybody who's curious, Marisol's templating exiles the card with a counter on it, and then it gains the abilities of all those counters. So when it leaves the battlefield, when it leaves the battlefield, it comes back, it retains those abilities.
Yeah, the only way to interact with that is like the Eldrazi from like Oath of the Gatewatch that like
put stuff back in,
back into people's decks.
Process it.
Then I have like Lavinia, which is just basically like a total lock deck.
Yeah.
People play try to think. The other one that's like super fun is the vampire Angie Falconwrath.
Oh yeah, because that's an auto win when she comes down, right?
Well, it should be like, but you have to really stretch to get there because there are a limit on the number of like even playable like madness spells, and you're just basically trying to get to a point where you get you can discard a World Gorger dragon and go infinite with either Dance of the Dead or Animate Dead, and then you pitch Avacyn's Judgment and like get them for $1 billion.
Yeah. For anybody who's curious, Angie Falconwrath with Crimson Vow coming up. Angie Falconwrath is 1 black-red for 1/3 with haste and tap, discard a card if it has madness. Tap, discard a card, draw a card. If it has madness, you get to untap it. So theoretically, when it comes down, if your entire deck is madness spells, you just loot your whole deck, and shenanigans can happen when your deck is flipped over.
The issue with that is, so there are some really good cards in that deck, but the issue is that if you just brick and like hit like 5 lands, you're kind of out of things to do.
Yeah, it's if anybody played a long time ago when I was still playing any amount of standard, it was way before Arena came out, but there was the cycling deck, the 6 mana enchantment that it would ETB. Cycling costs 0 for you, and then you would try and cycle, essentially just put your whole deck in your hands because you'd cycle through your whole deck for free, and then combo them out with like Approach to the Second Sun after you made a bunch of mana. And Angie Falconwrath and EDH reminds me of that.
Yeah, this is so EDH is like there's a limited amount of fun, in my personal opinion, to be had with EDH, because the games are relatively fast for the most part, and you're not like, when I'm playing EDH with my friends, we're not really playing Magic. We're just hanging out, and Magic is happening 1/4 of the time, and we watch Kroll on repeat the entire weekend. I don't know if you're a Kroll fan, Phil.
I haven't watched it. No.
Great yet very terrible sci-fi movie. It's like Star Wars meets Conan. It's super bad. But so we just spend the whole weekend like, doing that and like drinking and hanging out, and that'll be fun. That'll be a nice change of pace after several. It feels like several years, a year plus of all this nonsense.
That sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun. And what I appreciate about EDH and the deck building in that format is it's exactly what I want to do in Legacy, but Legacy offers me the competitive outlet that I also crave.
Yeah,
and I would love the middle ground, but anytime if I'm looking for inspiration, a lot of the time I'll look at winning EDH decks just to see what kind of 2-card combinations people are putting together to try and do something busted, and see if those cards incidentally are also Legacy playable or Fringe Legacy playable, because then maybe there's something going on. And you can try and see like, okay, with the consistency of 4-ofs and trying to leverage a 2-card combination of some kind. Maybe you can get something in Legacy too. That's happened a couple of times where I've like, obviously had middling success, but it's good inspiration for anybody who likes to brew in Legacy. EDH and Modern are 2 good places to look for inspiration.
Yeah, definitely. One of the great things to tie all this into Legacy, one of the great things you can do is scour like CDH and look at the decks that are big. And then when you see releases for commander decks and whatnot, you can see what cards would slot into those decks. And those are a big marker of the MTG finance for right now. Like, back, what was this? When the second Ravnica came out, CDH started to get big. And that's when like, I think the last GP I went to was like a day 2 to a limited GP. I can't day 2 a Legacy GP. I could only day 2 limited GPs.
I mean, Legacy GPs, I imagine you're going to have people who are just more reps in the format, right?
Yeah.
Like limited GPs are going to have limited reps.
Well, this is the reason why I do well in limited GPs is I generally either have played a ton. So Dragons of Tarkir, I played a ton of Dragons of Tarkir. And I got a really good sealed pool. Like I couldn't, I got like 4 dragons in my sealed pool. Amazing. For whatever return to Ravnica second set was, I had been jamming the crap out of it on Arena, and it had only been out for a week. So I got in there and knew what I was doing already. And that's just, sometimes you luck out by already knowing what's happening. Anyhow, we should talk about Legacy. You were talking before with me about what the metagame looks like right now and about bannings.
Yeah, so we're recording this on, we got the BNR list that just didn't have Legacy mentioned whatsoever. There was like Brainstorm was banned in Historic or something. It's stuff that doesn't really matter for our listenership nor us really, I don't think. But Legacy was just not on that discussion at all, not even like we're watching these cards or whatever. And so that made me like, everybody thought, at least the Twitter response that I saw, which, Twitter dictates the world, right? All 200 people that are on it. And essentially like people were surprised that it just got it got shunned, right? Like Legacy wasn't there at all. So it made me think like, okay, it's been bannings right now have been a hot topic. And I was thinking back, there was also the whole discussion with Ragavan being compared to Deathrite Shaman, and people were like, Ragavan's better than Deathrite Shaman, and I think those people are crazy. But Ragavan is still obviously very good. It's been in discussion as the card that needs to go, as opposed to like the other contender being Days and figuring out if you want to go after like the threat part of the Delver shell, if you will, Delver being threat Wasteland Days, right? Like premier threat Wasteland Days is like the tempo shell, and which one of that axis do you want to go after as the way to like solve this problem of Delver just being the best deck for the last 10 years. And so I was thinking back to when Deathrite Shaman was removed from the format, what was its metagame share? And it hovered around 40% because it was both in the Delver decks, but it was also in the non-blue decks that just wanted a black mana dork that was incidentally also a threat. So when it got the axe, its metagame share was at 40%. Now, for reference as to like what the most popular cards are, we're looking at MTG Top 8 right now. The most played card in the format is Brainstorm at 52.5% of decks over the last 2 months. So this is taking a meta share or a look at the last 2 months of all the tournaments that have been submitted to MTG Top 8 to get what percentage of cards is in which decks. So it's Brainstorm at 52.5%, Force of Will at 51.5%, all 4-ofs. Ponders at just under 51%, almost all 4-ofs. And then the next card is Wasteland, Misty Rainforest, Scalding Tarn, Polluted Delta, Volcanic Island, Flooded Strand, in that order, all hovering around upper 36% to lower 41%, or lower 41%. Wasteland is just shy of 49%. So it's in half of decks. You're going to run into Wasteland half of the time. But then the next card after those lands, so it goes the 2 cantrips, Force of Will, lands, and then the next card is Days at 34.4% of decks. then Karacas, which isn't really fair, as you mentioned, because Karacas shows up on average as a 1.4 of in 32.8% of decks.
Yeah.
So you're going to see Karacas, like Karacas will be
It's
in a third of your opponent's decks.
It's an important
yeah.
distinction to make that you some of these cards aren't 4 ofs in every deck, you know?
Yeah. So like all the lands, like there's a variety split, you know, based on what mana bases are going to be. Brainstorm, Ponder, Force of Will, all 4 ofs pretty much. Wasteland, 3.5, which means that some people, like there are some decks like the Ragavan decks that can't afford to play all 4 Wastelands. Some people are in control decks are playing a couple of Wastelands. Like there's the 4-color band shell that plays 1 or 2 Wastelands.
Yeah.
So that brings the number down. But more or less, if you're running into a Wasteland deck, you're going to run into at least 3 of them.
Phil, does it trigger you that Ponder is 3.9%? 3.9 played? That's in fact, you know that, right?
It's clear whatever is bringing Ponder and 50.9% of decks down to 3.9 on average in decks. The 0.1, whoever's doing the 0.1 off is doing it wrong. You're just doing it wrong. You are just wrong. You're doing it wrong.
Oh,
anyway,
so good.
So Karacas is average on 1.4 copies in a third of decks, which means that it's present, but it's a 1 of, so it's not going to be, you know, constant. Then we get to Ragavan. Ragavan's in 26.1% of decks as 3.8 copies. So more or less, if you run into Ragavan, it's going to be a 4 of.
It's a 4 of,
and you're gonna run into it a quarter of the time. It's 26.1% of decks.
The only reason that I can see that Ragavan wouldn't be a 4 is that people just can't afford to put 4 of them in their deck.
I was going to say it's either people can't afford to play,
it's too new still,
or they're hedging in some capacity on the legend rule, or the red's a splash. But yeah, I mean,
I think it's MTG finance reasons.
It might be finance. It is 3.8 on average. So the decks that aren't playing 4 are few. Then you have some removal spells between Source of Plowshares and Lightning Bolt. Those are both in quarter of decks based on whether or not you're playing white or red. And then you have Murktide Regent in a flat quarter of the format at average of
3 copies. Wow.
As opposed
That's
to 4
wild.
copies, yeah.
How much is Murktide Regent?
Murktide Regent is not expensive enough to not warrant that. I think that's
$25. All right.
Oh, it moved up. When it was first released, it was like $12 or something.
Yeah, it wasn't that expensive.
People also didn't realize like how good the card was at the time. They knew it was good, but they didn't realize how good. So I
remember pooping on it immediately, being like, it's blue, it's gonna get red blasted. But like apparently if you just put 4 of them in your deck, if every threat in your deck is blue, then you know your opponent has to start making water decisions about how they do the red blasts.
So if we want to take a look at the difference between why is Ragavan at 26.1% and Daze is at 34.5%, the difference there is combo decks, right? The combo decks that aren't going to want Ragavan that are also going to play Daze,
like Infect,
Doomsday, Infect, Show and Tell. So that gap is about 13%, so or 12.5%. So you're looking at approximately 12.5% gap of combo decks that's making Daze more played.
Yeah.
Now 26.1%. Even though the format is new, it's not like it's unknown that what the best decks in the format are, right? It's like I feel like even though people may still be acquiring MH2 cards, if they're playing in paper, they know what the metagame looks like. Like the Ragavan decks and the blue-red shell, maybe the Jeskai shell that won like the Legacy Pit Open, like those are known quantities. And the space to reinvent the format with MH2 cards, I feel like that time we're past that point, right? It's been out long enough, and Moto has had enough time that we know what the format looks like. There's been a big paper tournament where we know what decks rose to the top and where the format has essentially settled out. So if we look at Deathrite Shaman when it went, and the reason for it going was it homogenized the format because it was showing up in bug control lists and it was showing up in the Delver tempo shells, and that was at 40%. And they said that homogenized the format at 40%, that if that's the threshold by comparison, then Ragavan theoretically is safe from the banhammer until it hits another 14% of the format.
Yeah.
So now I'm not like, who knows, like the reason that they ban cards is different every single time. Like the rationale,
it always is.
It's never consistent. So like you can't rely on what that is. However, if you were somebody who's like, I've sold my Ragavans, or I'm not buying into Ragavans because of the threat that it's going to get.
You got time. You got time.
It's one of those things where even if people are very loud, it isn't dominant enough of the format, it seems like, to be shifting what people are playing. Now, it may be dominant at top tables, it may put up a bunch of results, but at the same time, Delver always did that. That's not new. Delver taking most of the top 8 slots of any given competitive event, that's been the thing for 10 years. So if it's the shell of Delver top 8ing, that is hard to argue. Like that's always going to be the case as long as the shell exists.
Yeah.
But if it's Ragavan in particular in the ban list, this isn't to argue one way or the other that Ragavan should or should not go. That aside, comparing it historically to the other 1-drop threat that fit into that slot of the Delver shell that escalated it to staying the best deck in the format, Ragavan has a ways to go. So if you wanted to get in on Ragavan, it looks like you have time. Take that with a grain of salt, obviously, but it's still got almost half of the metagame share to go before it hits Deathrite Shaman levels. Murktide, there's been some argument that Murktide, like some people want to see Murktide go because they think it's the more powerful threat. It deals with I don't think
I
so.
think that's so silly.
It has come up in the conversation though, right? Like you've heard that. That's not
Oh
new.
yeah, of course.
But same thing. Murktide is in a quarter of decks as a 3 of. It also has a bunch of ways to go before it would even be a consideration. Expressive Iteration is actually the next spell beyond the removal spells between Bolt and Plow. Expressive Iterations hovering just under 23% at 3.5 copies. It's played in everything that can play blue and red. People splash it. And then right under it is Urza Saga, and then you get into Lotus Petal, and then Tundra finishing out the top list here on page 1 of this list. The first non-Delver, non-blue card outside of removal spells, you have Force of Negation, Dragon's Rage, Channeler, Prismatic Ending that show up just under 20%. Then a couple of lands. You have Ancient Tomb because that's a pillar. You have Underground Sea. Delver of Secrets still shows up at 15.1% of decks. So like all of the cards that are in the Delver shell have surpassed Delver on how much is played, but Delver still sees play at 15.1% of decks as a 3 of. And you know, Lion's Eye Diamond as a pillar.
While we're on Delver real fast, I just want to cut in. We'll go back to Lion's Eye Diamond in a second. It's so funny to me that like a year, 2 years ago, you and I, like, you got me on board of like the ban Delver plan. And would we be where we are now if we had gotten rid of Delver then?
So I was on the ban Delver plan then because there wasn't anything to compete with Delver at the time.
For sure. Yeah. I mean,
right?
I'm just saying, like, if we had banned Delver then, do you think the shell would even still exist, or would people have moved on?
The show would exist because it would have just come back, right? People would do the same thing they would be doing now, except Delver would be like laughably on the ban list at this point.
Yeah.
But back then, Delver was the only thing, right? Like Delver was the sweeping threat, like nothing else compared to Delver at the time. And then my opinion on everything changed because at no point did I think they were just going to arbitrarily power creep Delver of Secrets. Right? Like it didn't cross my mind that we were going to get to a world where Delver of Secrets was going to be the 3rd or 4th best 1-drop that shell could play, because it was like over the course of history, it was like Delver of Secrets and then Deathrite Shaman, which was just like the additional 1-drops. And then the next thing down was what? Not Mongoose? Yeah. Which is like, you know, tier 7.
I mean, I love Mongoose.
You gotta love your Mongoose. but at the time, it's like it was unthinkable that they would power creep Delver of Secrets multiple times in the same year.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where my perspective shifted, because I was like, okay, if this is the trajectory of where cards are going to, if like the power level is going to continue at this trajectory, then the systemic problem then becomes Days, which was where I got on the Days. If something does need to go, I got on the argument that it's Days that needs to go over the threats, not because I think that Days is more powerful than those threats, but because Days is the systemic problem where every threat is going to get pushed by Days, as opposed to if you remove threats and they just print more threats, then the issue stays the same and you're solving a symptom as opposed to a systemic issue that underlies that problem. So that's where my argument for it comes from. And the argument that came back was the Jeskai decks have been cutting some number of Dazes. Not all the decks play 4 Dazes. Some play 2 days or 3 days. And I was saying that the one element that Daze has that Ragavan sort of has in the dash mechanic, but if your opponent goes turn 1 Ragavan and they're playing 2 Daze in their deck, you're still playing as though they have 4 if you don't know that they have 2. the presence of days is what warps behavior.
Yeah, if the
That
format lost days, you would definitely play very differently.
If the format lost days, and it would be similar to modern, where if somebody goes turn 1 Ragavan and you go turn 1 removal spell, that removal spell is going to resolve unless they decide to him themselves off of a force effect. Yeah. And you could also play around force and negation by waiting until their upkeep, at which point there's more dynamic play because people could be playing other counter
and they're
like
untapped.
Or yeah. So there's other ways of counterplay to decide what you want to play around based on what you like think might be the best thing to be doing. But if the idea would be to play around days, at least you could go turn 1, I'm going to bolt your Ragavan, and you know that it's not just going to trade like 1 for 1, and then you're just going to be leagues behind because you lost the die roll, right? So it's like, even if they're only playing, if they're playing a single days, but they go Ragavan on the play, your entire play pattern is warped to just assume that they could have days, and therefore you need to either respect it or understand that like whatever you throw into it is hopefully not backbreaking for you. Anyway, yes. So this is we're not trying to make this a topic of ban discussion, but that's where the argument comes from.
Let's go back to Lion's Eye Diamond. Yeah, there we go.
So yeah, you have Lion's Eye Diamond, which is a pillar of combo decks, and then you have Sylvan Library as the first non-straight Delver shell card that shows up at 14% of decks as a 2/of. So of all the creatures, for what it's worth, the next I guess it is a Delver threat because it's Urza Saga. The next threat to be on this list is Retrofitter Foundry at 12% of decks. So in terms of creatures, specifically creatures in Legacy, no creature shows up. It's the most played creature right now is Ragavan, then Murktide Regent, both at just a 0.25% of decks. Then Dragon's Rage Channeler, more or less the same decks, but it's in 18% of decks as opposed to 25% of decks. And then the actual non-Delver threat, the first one, isn't until Endurance at 11% of the format at 2 copies.
Endurance. Wow. Wowzers. Indeed. You know, I was about to ask.
Uro is next at 10%. So it's pretty much the same. It's like Endurance is going to see play in like Cloud Post, Maverick, decks that aren't playing blue. The discrepancy between a literal percent here, between 11.4 and 10.4% between Endurance and Uro, that 1% is the non-blue green decks.
That's wild, man.
That's it. There's your threats.
Dude, it's so funny to me looking at these decks. I'm just like scouring Legacy decks. I was like, you know what? Like one of the few decks I could still like put together and play was Death Shadow. I wonder if Death Shadow exists around here. It does, but Death Shadow is now a 3-color deck that plays Ragavan as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because it's easy. If anybody is curious, it's not until you get into sub 10% of decks that you start to get into like the other creatures. Stoneforge Mystic is the first white creature to show up at just over 8.5% of decks. Brazen Borrower is at the same rate, but only at just under a 2/of as opposed to a 4/of.
Brazen Borrower. Come on.
Elvish Reclaimer at 8%. That's also as a 3.5 to 4/of. And then that goes down. You have Grizzlebrand in the Reanimator decks. You have Snapcaster Mage as a 2/of and 7% of decks. So any of the control decks that are playing a couple copies. Baleful Strix shows up as a 3/of in 6.7% of decks.
What?
Mother of Runes is at the same rate. Once you get to page 5 of the most played cards, it looks like if you were to guess where D&T sits in the metagame right now, it hovers around 6.5 to 7% because that's where all the white cards are. Literally, Mother of Runes, Recruiter of the Guard, Thalia.
Flicker Wisp is down there. Yeah.
Yeah, they're all at the same percentage within a percent of each other.
Yep.
So that's your metagame. Your metagame, it's a blue metagame. You're going to run into Brainstorm Force Will Ponder half of the time. You're going to run into Ragavan decks a quarter of the time. They're likely going to have Murktide Regent alongside them. 1 in every 5 matches, you're going to run into a Dragon Rage Channeler deck. 1 in every 6 games, you're going to run into Lion's Eye Diamond, or every 6 matches rather. And that's it. You're going to run into Ancient Tomb just over 17% of the time. But that's the metagame. How do you feel about it?
I mean, it's fine, dude.
Yeah.
I think it's fine. Like, I think people will always be salty about losing to Brainstorm Days decks. They're never going to be there. No one's ever happy unless they're actually also playing that deck. They're like, yep, my deck is good, but it didn't win the coin flip or, draw the right cards, etc. Like, to me, that's legacy, man. That's good. Like, good legacy play is like managing your brainstorms properly, managing your ponders properly, wastelanding the right land. Like, I don't know. I think that this is a totally fine metagame, and is it not fun to play against the same decks over and over again? Yeah. Well, what does that come down to? If you don't like losing the mirror match from Ragavan to Ragavan deck, don't play a Ragavan deck, man. Play the deck to beat the Ragavan deck. They exist. They're out there, obviously. Like, not every deck that wins these bigger events are Ragavan decks. I personally think that Death and Taxes is a great deck to go up against those decks.
If you're a skilled pilot with Death and Taxes, it's proven that it has the wherewithal to take down those decks.
And that's a nice cheap deck as far as building a deck is concerned.
I was listening to a podcast earlier that Eric Virgo was on. Shout out to Eric. How you doing, bud? And he was talking about how he's enjoyed playing Modern as of late because it doesn't have the same stress on it to play certain cards that Legacy does. Because the compression that Wasteland and Days put on the format to lower curves, he's saying just doesn't, because that doesn't exist in Modern. It's a whole different experience of like what if you're looking for something different. And it made me think that like having both Wasteland and Days, when I heard that, as opposed to the first thing that I thought of was, what are the pressures that keep those cards down? Like the more expensive cards, essentially like the cards those two cards, Wasteland and Days, compressing the format, push out what cards, and what are the ways that you could combat Wasteland and Days? Now, the ways that you combat Days, you have to lower your curve because you have to be able to get to play around Days by playing through its tax sooner. So the compression there is high. Or the way to play around, like playing through Days rather, is you have to lower your curve so you can get past that tax faster, right?
Yeah.
If you're playing a 3-drop, it's going to take you an additional turn than a 2-drop. Easy math, right? For Wasteland, the way that you can play, you can combat through Wasteland is just either sequencing so you're not running out your non-basics, or play a deck that steers away from non-basics, or you can lower your curve so that if you do get wasted, it doesn't blow you out. So the compression on Wasteland to lower the format, you have deck building. You can turn to deck building beyond just lowering your curve to play around a Wasteland. You can just play basics, and then your opponent will have dead Wastelands on the table. And if they're playing a deck that doesn't have any colorless spells in it, a lot of Delver is that right now, right? So think of Delver as colloquially like what blue-red is right now, even if it doesn't have Delvers. Between Expressive Iteration and all of the 1-mana spells, there isn't really much that Wasteland is going to help you cast. Maybe Quarter Cutting's out of the board, maybe a TNN out of the board. Clearly, Doggos love the idea of Wasteland as well.
He's out there barking it. He's out there repping Wasteland.
The idea of that shell, you can turn to deck building to play around Wasteland in ways that you can't do that with Days. So it's more argument of like where Days has more compression on the format in my view than Wasteland, even though they work in tandem to compel the same things. And I didn't really think about Days versus Wasteland in that capacity until I heard Eric talk about the comparison to Modern where it just doesn't exist. Because I was like, well, I play a lot of Miracles, which means I play a lot of basics. And a lot of the time I just will see Wastelands. Sometimes Wasteland will catch me because I'm constrained and I have to search up a tool and it sucks. But other times, like, players will have Wastelands across the table for me and I just don't care. Like, it's just not a relevant thing to me because I can play through it through my choice of deck building to have a more stable mana base. Whereas regardless of what my mana base looks like Days looks the same.
Yeah.
The only way to play through that is to lower my curve. And that is another deck building constraint that Days provides to the rest of the format. Even if you don't run up against Days at all over the course of a tournament, you show up to that tournament having built your deck in preparation for Days. the same way that you'll do for Wasteland, but you'll do it in a different way.
It would be interesting to see what the format would look like without days. You know, like would we see more 3-4 mana spells? You know, I don't think at first we would initially, but I think it might trend towards that in time.
There's interesting implications to me on like when the idea of like if days goes, then all of a sudden combo becomes too powerful. Well, some of combo lose days. They can't be as fast because they don't have a free counter spell to just back up a kill. But for the combo decks that don't play days, it might change the play patterns where some players might play slower, but it also means that whatever counter magic or ways to interact with their playing might be more damning than what days is, because you can, like combo decks with fast mana may be able to play through days faster through fast mana, whether it be with Lotus Petal.
More people would be playing stuff like Tormod's Crypt and whatnot, like maybe even main to like deal with that stuff too.
I think the idea of trying to predict what the format would look like without days as just like flatline, like here are these broad stroke things that happened if days isn't around.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's no way for us to really know what that looks like, because we've also never played in a world where we would even think about what that looks like. No. Deck building there's in all of Legacy's tenure that we've ever played it, there has never been a time where you haven't built a deck with the idea that days isn't in the format. So the means of interaction to stop combo for being like more powerful because days isn't around, the idea that like Delver is the police of the format, I don't know how any of us can really assume that we would know what that would look like, because we have no historical precedent to be like, here's what it would look like. That just doesn't exist. There's nothing we can turn to be like, oh yeah, it would look something similar to this. The closest thing in my mind is we can look to Modern and see like what kind of cards that are Legacy playable also see play in Modern, or what kind of cards could be Legacy playable that see play in Modern, because they don't have to worry about days. Now, granted, there's like some things like Omnath, like 4-color Omnath and Elementals that sees play because there's no Wasteland, so they can play all the colors. Barring that kind of stuff, like who knows what the Legacy format would look like without that. So I think any of the discussion of like the slippery slope argument of like Legacy would become combo winter if it didn't have days is it's a little disingenuous.
It's funny looking, you know, as you were saying that, I had to like just look at the top played cards in Modern. It's funny that the top played cards in both formats are basically a boon spell. It's Lightning Bolt in Modern.
Yeah. I mean, it's just the most efficient removable spell, right?
Yeah. Prismatic Ending. I won't name lands. So Lightning Bolt, and then you skip like 10 things, get a Mishra's Bauble, Prismatic Ending, and Ragavan. Mm-hmm. Into Dragon Rage Chandler, Counterspell. I forgot Counterspell is now in the format. Urza's Saga, and Teferi Time Raveler, and then Unholy Heat.
It's Fire Design and like the free spell and Mishra's Bauble, and that's Modern. It's Bolt, Fire Design, Mishra's Bauble.
Wild.
So that's what the format looks like. So essentially, the point of all this is to say that it doesn't look like if something were to go, at least from metagame share, Days is way closer to that Deathray Shaman Shethold of 40% than Ragavan is. But
transgressive things need a place to live.
Yeah, but Days getting 6% more of the format, that I think either combo would need to uptick, Delver would need to uptick, which would, if Delver upticks that shell, then Ragavan would go with it. So Ragavan would hit 30% by the time Days hits close to 40%. Or combo picks up, in which case Days would go up by itself. So Days is closer to that threshold. The other cards, Ponder, Brainstorm, Force of Will, are well above it. And then nothing else is really close, nor is anything else really in discussion on the Banhammer. Murktide's way down there. It's not going anywhere. But that's it. So if anybody was looking to either move into that deck, move into Ragavans, it looks like you're safe.
You're
At
good.
least from this, at least from this perspective.
Do it, Doug.
You're safe.
Phil said he'll buy them back from you if you buy in now.
Wow. I mean, it is one of those things where like that's one of the things where it's like we look at results, but the thing is like results haven't always been a predicator of like what they look at for bans. Like sometimes like best decks just get to be best decks, and it's not until something is oppressive or objectively obviously broken, like Underworld Breach, that they will take aggressive action, or if it shuts out a swath of decks that they want in the format the way Ren and 6 did, where it's just like, yeah, you can't play your X1 decks anymore. But right now, from this standpoint, Ragavan is not going to go anywhere. So sorry if you wanted it to go. It doesn't look like that's going to happen anytime soon. But who knows? Maybe enough noise still makes it happen. But for anybody who doesn't like Legacy right now and isn't really interested in Modern because you just want to get away from Ragavan and Murktide.
Is this your plug for EDH or a plug for Flesh and Blood?
This is my plug for Pioneer, man.
Flood out Flesh and Blood.
Here's my pitch for players to play Pioneer. If you like Legacy,
We got them, Phil. They came in the mail, by the way.
Oh, did they? Hell yeah!
Yeah.
Right, so
Flesh and Blood. We'll talk about Flesh and Blood on the next episode.
We're part of the Ponzi scheme. So if you like Legacy, I think you would really enjoy. I highly would recommend trying out Pioneer.
I love Pioneer, man. It's a lot of fun.
Here's my reasons why I think Pioneer is an entirely different experience, but you still get what feels like Legacy power level without any of the play patterns of Legacy that make it feel like a whole new experience in a game that you've played forever. The main things are, it's not a Fetchland format, right? And that
one,
if you want to experience just Magic in a whole different way, the most egregious mistake that Magic has ever made is Fetchlands. They're not going anywhere ever, but they are the most toxic, devastatingly negative thing to happen to the game ever. A lot of good has come from them. There's a lot of intricate play patterns that have come out of it, but the damage that in my opinion that Fetchlands have done to the game, and cards that have been axed from the game as a result of Fetchlands or broken because of Fetchlands, is well higher than what the good that they have done of letting you have perfect mana bases. Yeah. So Brainstorm being at 52.5% of decks, that's not Brainstorm, that's Fetchlands.
That's Fetchlands, yeah.
Like Brainstorm gets the benefit from being the most played card, but it's because of Fetchlands. Like the top play cards, once you get past Force of Will, Ponder is really good. Ponder is also very good because of Fetchlands. Brainstorm is obviously only good because of Fetchlands. And then you have Wasteland, and then you have Misty Rainforest, Scalding Tarn, Polluted Delta, and Flooded Strand, with Volcanic Island like mixed in. Like we skip that gap of like the most played cards, but like Fetchlands being the most played cards are indicative that like, yeah, 0 mana instant speed tutors for perfect mana bases is unhealthy. And
I'm sure if you added up that their percentage and the number of times they're played in a deck, it would go over the blue cantrips that are listed there for sure.
Totally. Also, like there are a bunch of cards that like we don't necessarily think of that get infinitely better because Fetchlands exist. Sylvan Library, we had to go far on the list, better because of Fetchlands. Life from the Loam, an entire pillar of the format, playable because Fetchlands exist.
What about like Delver of Secrets?
Delver of Secrets has incidental value off of it.
Because you can look and be like, no, that sucks. I don't want that card. Fetch.
Yeah, like, hey, Prismatic Ending, you can have perfect mana and you can hit your third and fourth mana if you want to because you have Fetchlands. Like everything is Fetchlands up, and like every problem that you'll ever see is the result is probably because Fetchlands broken. Yeah. Deathrite Shaman's on the ban list because of Fetchlands. All the Delve cards that are on the ban list because of Fetchlands.
No, like Deathrite Shaman was trash in Standard when it was out. It was like
you played as a 2 in a sideboard.
Yeah, you played
the Reanimator Mirror.
Yep. And maybe you played it in like Jund because you were like, late game, this is a closer.
So
in a stalemate.
I am firmly in the camp that like any type of ban discussion that you have, you are implicitly accepting that like Fetchlands are actually the inherent problem with like any underlying foundational argument that you could make. And then once we accept that we're moving past that, then we can have the discussion. But it's just at this point, it is just implicitly it has to be accepted. It's just like Fetchlands are the actual problem. Anyway, Pioneer doesn't have any of that. You have Fabled Passage, but Fabled Passage only gets basics, only gets them untapped if it's your 4th land drop. so it's not going to fix your mana in the early game, and it's not going to be able to be abused, like by getting 4 and 5 color decks. Yeah. Perfect. The other thing about Pioneer, though, is that because Pioneer doesn't have fetch lands, things like Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise are legal, and they're at a power level that is totally acceptable, but they're still good, obviously, because they're powerful cards. But you have to do things to enable them, whether that's playing a lot of cards that cantrip, playing cards that fill your yard, but you still have access to legacy powerful level cards in Pioneer without the abusiveness that fetch lands enable in the older formats. On top of that, all of these other decks that feel like they should be playable in Legacy, you can play that, like have cards legal in Pioneer, you can play in Pioneer, and you can play them in a way that they are booned because of the Legacy level banned cards that exist in that format. So you can play Control with your Dig Through Times, and it's totally fine, where you can do your trades, and you can play Arclight Phoenix. Arclight Phoenix is fringy in Legacy. It's not going to win a tournament anytime soon, but you can play that as a legitimate deck in Pioneer. The amount of brewing space that you can do.
There's a lot of brewing space.
A lot of brewing space.
A lot of brewing space.
All the companions are still legal. So like Luris is legal in that format, but there isn't. It's not like in Modern where you can just start flipping through your Mishra's Bauble over and over every turn, because that Mishra's Bauble doesn't exist in the format. Yep. You can get cute and play shit like maybe you get your second copy of Oath and Nissa, but like you got to go deep. It's way more interesting. And I imagine that like a lot of the cards, or the newer cards, the more recent cards in the last like 5 or 6 years that you are interested in playing in Legacy that you can't play because they're not powerful enough, you could play in Pioneer. The other big talking point for Pioneer: no Modern Horizons cards exist in the format.
Get them out of here.
MH1, MH2 does not exist in Pioneer. That's not part of that format. So if you are tired of playing Legacy and Modern, which are just MH2 constructed, you can play Pioneer and have a whole different experience. So for anybody who's like tired of Legacy and is like, I need to take a break from this, rather than take a break from Magic, highly recommend Pioneer.
Or EDH.
Or EDH, there you go. Yeah,
which you'll at least see not 4 of Ragavan there.
You too could build Gwafa Hazid. We could all play Gwafa Hazid 4 Gwafa Hazid decks. At the table. Who Gwafa Hazids the other Gwafa?
It would be an interesting game, I think. Well, I think that kind of does it for tonight. I'm about to fall asleep.
I'm gonna. Should we? Can we get title suggestions real quick?
Title suggestions for this show?
Yeah, I'm gonna say let's call it. We're living in Gwafa's world.
It's Gwafa's world.
It's
Gwafa's world. We're just living in it.
We're all just trying to draw cards.
All right. Well, I think that does it for this week. Once again, I'd like to thank our Patreons. Thank you, everyone, for supporting the show. And, if you're listening to this, watch us on YouTube as well, or subscribe to our YouTube channel, because I put these shows up on YouTube, and you can see me and Phil, talking at each other. I drank like 7 beverages while Phil was on a rant at one point. So that's a fun Easter egg for you to watch.
If you also don't have a strong opinion about anything that we said that would get you to weigh in, just, leave us a happy Asmorda Martica Dicena Coldcar.
Asmorda Martica Dicena Coldcar to you too as well, sir.
And it is Morda Martica Dicena Coldcar to all of our listeners.
Right back at them. All right. Good night. Have a good one, everyone.
I'm the one who plays Gutshot. I'm the one. I didn't die. I'm the one who plays Gutshot. I'm the one. I didn't die. I'm the one who plays Gutshot. I'm the one. I didn't die. I'm the one who plays Gutshot. I'm the one. I didn't die. Hey, hey, hey. Hey, hey, hey. Hey, hey, hey. Hey, hey, hey. You're gonna be ready to pay it. If you hesitate, you're not playing 19 life to the dome, no question. Now on 1, your game is arrested. What about the burn when you say go? Sitting at 1, you can't take no. Passing a turn, don't take no time. Just fade 1 and stay alive. I'm the one who plays Gutshot. I'm the one. I didn't die. I'm the one who plays Gutshot. I'm the one. I didn't die. Are you gonna be ready to play it? If you hesitate, you're not playing 19 cards, might feel insane. Stay at 1 and win the game. Pay 19 life and I can't win. Coming down eliminates a life of sin. Sure as it holds no others, but if you win the game, your life total don't matter. I'm the one plays gunshot? I'm a one. I didn't die. I'm a one. Who plays gunshot? I'm a one. I didn't die. Hey, hey, hey. Hey, hey, hey. Hey, hey, hey. Hey, hey, hey. Yeah. I am at one. Yeah. I'm a one. Who plays gunshot? I'm a one. I didn't die. I'm a one. Who plays gunshot? I'm a one. I didn't die. Hey, hey, hey. Hey, hey, hey. Hey, hey, hey. Hey, hey, hey.
Strong.